So before we move on to the power supply board, I did want to mention something about testing. Now, as you know, we completed the tone board. And when you complete a board, it's always a good idea to test afterwards to make sure that everything's okay, especially if it was working to begin with. If it isn't, that may be a problem. But if it's working to begin with, you want to test after each board. And the reason for that is if you've messed something up, you know which was the last board you worked on. If you recap and change the transistors on the entire unit and go to power it up and there's something wrong, you have no leads. You have no idea where to go. You also want to make sure that your unit doesn't blow up when you first power it on. Highly unlikely, but it can. You know, if you have a dead short. So how do you test that? Well, the item you see on the right is what's known as a dim bulb tester, and what that does is you actually plug the receiver into the dim bulb tester, and then turn it on. And if the bulb glows, and stays on, you've got a dead short somewhere. And what that does is it protects your unit. It's taking some of that power and putting it to the bulb. Now, I purchased my dim bulb tester. It wasn't that expensive because it was already pre-built. But there's a million YouTube videos on how to make your own. You go to Home Depot, you get the parts, you wire it together, and you've got a dim bulb tester. But I didn't feel like doing that. For the cost of one of these, it was not a big deal. So you'll see it has an on-off switch and a little light that tells you there's power on. So what we'll do is we'll plug the receiver in to the dim bulb tester. I've got this backwards. Oh, that plug is so tight. Not the dim bulb tester, actually the one on the amp. So I've given this power, and now I'm going to turn the power button on the receiver. And you'll listen for the relay click, which tells you that the receiver's working, but you'll also watch the dim bulb. And there's our relay click. Everything's good. The bulb didn't light up. You have no shorts. Okay. Now you should also test it for sound, because while the power may be good and you have no dead shorts, you want to make sure you haven't caused a problem in terms of sound quality. So we're going to turn this off. So if you're hearing music playing, and by the way, this is royalty-free music from YouTube. I would normally play Amazon Music with my little tablet there, my Fire tablet. But because I want this video to actually be okay on YouTube, I went to their royalty-free music. So as you can see, we're playing, and I've got a couple JBL speakers hooked up. I had a pair of smaller test speakers, but unfortunately, in something I was doing, I blew them out. They were little mini, I'll show you, little mini Kenwoods that worked perfect for what I was doing, but unfortunately I blew one out. So I'm actually using a pair of my JBLs, and you can hear this is the bass. Turn that all the way off. Right, and the mid, and the treble. Okay, turn that off, and the loudness button. So, turn it off. Put something on in the background. There we go. So it works. Turn this down. Okay, so basically what we've determined is there's no dead shorts, the music plays, and we're good. So now we'll move on to the power supply board. But this is a step you should really do in between each board. I know it's a pain in the butt, and if you don't have some small speakers to test it with, it's even more of a pain in the butt. But you will thank yourself later because, as I said, if you do a board and there's a problem, you know exactly where the problem is. If you do all the boards at once and then fire it up and you get no sound, where do you start? I hope this was helpful. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the power board. And I've taken the parts out of the power supply board bag. And you can see we have a bunch of capacitors that we're going to change. We're going to change a diode, which if you look at close in the diode, the silver in there is what's going to go towards the line on the board. You'll see that. Then we have a metal back transistor that is going to go on a heat sink on that board. We have a transistor. And then we have what these things are known as a double diode. And there's two different. There's the U1620G and U1620R. And the instructions tell you where they go on H20H, 803 and H304. And that's these two here. And there's specific location. If you put them in wrong, it's bad. There's where the diode is going to go. And obviously you see the capacitors, and that's where the metal backed with thermal paste is going to go. Now, I'm not going to show you how to do the capacitors because you've already seen that. You know, it's no big deal. But I am going to show you about the double diodes, the diode, and the metal backed one, so you get an idea. And with this board, because you have easy access from the other side, you won't have to take the board off. About the only board you have to take off to work on is the tuner board. The one, you know, and that'll have a very special video of its own. But other than that, all of these are accessible from underneath, and I'll show you that in a second. So now that I've tipped this up, that's the bottom of the power supply board, and everything is accessible from under there. There's where the tone board was that we did before, and you can see all of the boards are really accessible from underneath, with the exception of that tuner board. Okay, so I'm going to get going on the capacitors first, get them out of the way, but I'll leave some room so I can show you about the double diodes and all that kind of good stuff. And in case you were wondering how I knew where the double diodes went, you can see it right here in the instructions that you have the H803 and H804, and the ones marked 16G and the DS132, blah, 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 all that good stuff, and the transistor and everything. And that's a benefit of really buying these kits from this very reputable seller, because you get these kinds of things. Unless you're an expert and you know this kind of stuff, it could be very daunting. So I wanted to show you something very important on this capacitor I moved on the power supply, and it'll probably apply to most of these on the power supply. This one was glued on the bottom, and I'll show you the one I removed. You can see some of the glue, and I had pulled it off the board. And the way I was able to remove that is, I'm going to turn this around, is you can see where I desoldered it there. But then I used a heat gun behind and on the front, just a little bit. You don't want to try and melt the board, right? I used a heat gun and was able to, you know, just wiggle it and remove it. And then on the board itself, I took off the glue. But the reason I'm also pointing this one out is I don't want you to get confused. Pay very close attention. There are a variety of UF ratings on that board, but there's a singular one that's 1,000 UF, which is pretty high. Don't get it confused with the 100 UF one in there, or you'll be very unhappy. Here's the replacement for it. It's not much different in size, and let's get the rating here. 1,000 UF, and it's let's get the light, 16 volts. This was 1,000 UF, 10 volts, so it's a little higher in volts. Okay, there's a reason why they use glue on some of those caps on the power supply board, And that is because at low frequencies, these capacitors could vibrate and cause problems. So what they do is they use just a little touch of glue to keep it from vibrating. You don't have to use the glue. I just put a little bit of this electronic grade silicone. It's clear, just a little bit on the replacement cap. I will use like a dot on each side, put it in place, get it down to the board, and then put a little bit around the outer side of it, just like on each side. But I said I wasn't going to show removing the caps. I just did want to point that out. And the reason I'm removing the caps, and then I'll start filming for the diode there that you can see above where the cap was removed, and those two double diodes in the heat sink backed transistor. So, okay, stay tuned. And there it is with the three capacitors removed, the 1,000 one at the top and the two 470s below, and that was so I could get a better view of the two double diodes there. So I just wanted to make sure you could see the diode there. And you notice you can see the arrow on the board that's pointing upward, and the black or gray line on there that says that's the direction it goes. So what we're going to see is the replacement diode for that is going to have a line on it, and that's the direction we can go. I also wanted to show you these two double diodes that I installed, and they replace the 131 and the 132. And it's important that you put the right one, as I've pointed out before, in the right place, because one goes inward, the other one goes outward in terms of the current. It doesn't matter which direction you put them in the holes, because they're going to work the same way. What does matter, though, is you put the right ones in the right spots. And I'm going to show you. (131B) and 132B. Those are the ones that came out. And you notice, look at the arrows on them. That one's the inward. And that one is hard to read. I think it's dirty. It's outward. So you want to make sure the replacement ones go in the right way. And the instructions tell you this. There you go. You see the gray stripe. So obviously that's going to go where the other gray stripe went, in that direction. If you put it in the wrong direction, it's bad. It'll come out as all one piece. And then I'll show you how we take it off the heat sink, clean it up, and add new thermal paste, put it back together, and then put it back on the board. So again, this is the power supply board where we're cooking along. So just to show you, that's the diode we've taken out, and that's the diode that's going to go in. And there is the transistor we have desoldered that's going to get replaced. I'll show you that in a minute. I just wanted to show you, you notice it's got the little pieces of plastic over the legs. We're going to do that the same on those. It's just to protect it from whatever. I just always transfer it. So I just wanted you to see the diode. I've taken off the little plastic ends of the wires and put them on the new one. I've taken the transistor, these don't count right now. I've taken the transistor off the heatsink, and there's the screw, and there's the new transistor that's going to go on there. What I'm going to do, though, before I put that back together is, number one, I'm going to I'm going to clean up that backing, and number two, on the back of this transistor, on the metal back, I'll put a little of this thermal paste, and you see it's got a metal back, and you just put a thin little layer that would kind of match up with where you see I'm going to clean there. And then I'm going to put it back in the board. It can only go in one way. It's got a nice locating pin there. You can't possibly put it in backwards. So, but you will want to spread the legs a little bit so it kind of lines up with those to make it easier to get in. Obviously, you'll screw it back in. So I'm going to put this all back together, put the diode back in, put the transistor back in and then show you that. So before I put the parts in, something I wanted to point out, when you take the parts out like this and you know where the things are going to go back, or as you go along, it's a good idea. This is, show you the swabs, if I can get in front of the camera. There you go. As you use these, and I have a little squeeze bottle of alcohol. You see I'm just putting some on the swab. That's a good time to clean the front of the boards. And alcohol is great because it evaporates very quickly, helps you get the dust and schmutz. I'm sure my hand is in front of the camera. I apologize for that. But areas where you've already taken parts out, you can clean up. Okay, and very, very, a lot of crud here where and my hand's in the way, where that heat sink was. So I'm gonna clean that up, and if we have to, we'll get a little brush. I have a little brush. Won't hurt anything. And let me pull that out, and you can just squeeze a little alcohol on that. And I'm gonna show you what the squeeze bottle looks like. See, it's just one of these, and it's very helpful. I'm putting a little bit on the brush, and I'm just gonna get that stuff off of there. Part of it is probably glue. It's not gonna hurt anything, but you know, the more you can clean, you can see I'm getting off that old glue that was under the cap there. And like I said, alcohol is great because it dries like instantly. So now I'm going to go and put the parts back in and show you that part. Okay. I wanted to give you a close-up on this. I'm handheld here. If you look up to the upper right, you see H808. That's the diode, and you notice the gray stripe is upward, like in the arrow. I've left those large capacitors out of the way so that you can see the two double diodes, which are, let me see if I can point this out without messing up. That's one, that's two. I've showed you that before. I've replaced the transistor here, the small capacitor there, this transistor, okay, that pretty easy because there's only one small transistor like that on the board, so it's not a question of, well, which number do I have to use? So everything is in place, and I'm going to show you the backside in a minute. So all I have left to do at this point, besides putting those capacitors in, is pulling these two and getting them done. I'm going to turn this around. And show you where we're at in the board. You can see the legs sticking out, and it's a dirty board. We're going to clean that board up, but you can see the legs sticking out. And when I go to solder this, I'm actually going to lay this thing down flat, because it's a lot easier to solder straight up and down than it is to do it you know, sideways like this. But this is why I'm putting all the legs in first, is because it allows me to get everything in place. They'll hold in place because, you know, I've bent them at an angle, and then I can turn this on its face. If you did it one at a time, which, you know, you may want to do, you'd have to be flipping this up and down or soldering sideways. So we'll come back in a moment when I get those out and I'm ready to solder. Okay, so I lost some film where you can see all the legs sticking up and everything, but bottom line is, you've seen this in other things. I just basically soldered all of the spots. I used flux on all of the spots. And then when I was done, I cleaned the board. So that one's ready to go. And the next thing we'll do now is test, as we showed you earlier, in between boards. You always should, you know, do a dim bulb test and then hook it up to some speakers. Because if there's a problem, then I know it's this board, because we did the tone board earlier and everything worked. So now let's make sure this board works. And I'm sorry for losing the film. I can show you this completed. I'm going to turn sideways here. and you can see everything's in place. And it came out nice. Clean the top of the board, clean the bottom of the board. All right, on to testing.